Ci accomodiamo per cortesia. Yes, good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to this third day of the second Dolomite Conference for the Global Governance of Climate Change. And the title of the conference is A New Hope for Climate Actions Beyond Words. And believe me, it's been hard work. Hope is a very future-oriented, great word, but we've been working hard to drum up hope. It's no walk in the park, but there have been amazing thoughts being exchanged, amazing insights, and a big thank you to all of the contributors, and particularly to Francesco, the visionary behind the Vision Conference.
Beyond the conference, there are very many people, starting from the Vision team, the founding partners, AXA Italia, Autostrade Brennero, Trentino Marketing, the universities. But it will take me at least 10 minutes to remind everybody. Just one word on the title, because we were talking with Silvia the very first day about movies. We mentioned Don't Look Up, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Blanchett, Titanic again, Leonardo DiCaprio. A New Hope, for the ones that can still remember, is the title of one of the greatest movie ever, the first of the saga, George Lucas saga, Star Wars, with Harrison Ford as Han Solo, with Leila, the Princess Leila. Why it is a new hope? A new hope because we are sort of getting together. People from Mumbai, from New York, from Beijing, from Lagos, from Naples, from Foggia, and we are becoming friends. I think we have more or less around 50% of the people from the past edition. So we are becoming a community, and we will certainly accept the invitation of our minister to push forward the 10 ideas. The 10 ideas that, by the way, Giacomo, the objective of the final plenary will be to comment those ideas, to give suggestion on how to push forward the agenda and to feed a new hope. And I will, without much further ado, I would give words to the students, our energy, that will present the four panels and the ideas from the four problem-solving groups. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's call the students to the stage. We had 4 problem-solving groups, really for the issues that matter, the problems that are really the most pressing. And the first one is beyond ESG, measure less and measure better. Which are the mechanisms for steering private investments toward sustainability? And Cecilia and Antonio will present the concept paper, the hard work that has been put into for the past couple of days. Cecilia, Antonio. So, making their way to the stage. We will have a presentation of the problem-solving papers now. This morning, then we will have a panel on climate journalism, because it's existential that this challenge and the hope will be communicated to the public, and journalism plays a vital role with this. And then we will have a short coffee break afterwards, and then the closing session where we'll sum up all the findings of the previous days. Afterwards, this conference will move to Bolzano for another afternoon packed with interesting and challenging issues, and I invite you all to move with us. So, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. We're group 1. And as mentioned, we work on ESG and the topic of measuring less and measuring better. To give you a bit of a context, we're dealing with ESG as a framework to evaluate the sustainability of investments from companies, so the environmental, social, and governance aspects that companies can using an ESG frame. However, there are several issues related to the measurement that require deeper analysis and that slow the transition towards sustainability. The fact that, for instance, the ESG data are self-reported from companies, so it does not guarantee correctness and transparency. And also we focused on all other criticalities that emerged during the discussion with our group. There are, for instance, the lack of standardization, meaning that there is no harmonized framework or a standard that is used especially for evaluating the social aspects. And also the fact that different agencies use a different, for instance, terminology and also ways to assess the three factors. Then we consider greenwashing, meaning that companies tend to misrepresent their commitment to appear better than they actually are at tackling these issues. Then we consider the fact that the measurement of long-term impacts is difficult, given that results may take time to be actually accounted for. For instance, within the ESG, we have an implicit temporal separation between the E component whose impacts will be basically bear by the future generations, and on the other side, the social and governance aspects that the current generations can actually see the results of. And finally, the fact that ESG measurement deals with subjectivity and complexity, so the fact that ESG variables have many facets and really are subjectively assessed.
Thank you, Cecilia. I will now be discussing our proposed solution. So it's based on these criticalities that we believe that global governance is very much needed. And the pursuit that we believe should be pursued, the solution that we believe should be pursued, is to have an institution with high credibility, such as the UNEP, to determine a set of indicators which are appropriate for sustainability-related measurements for various economic sectors. Given that there's not much established works to make ESG more credible, we believe that the I6B of the IFRS would be an attempt in the right direction. However, it is still not yet broad enough. How do we prop up this central organization? Through the involvement of supporting relevant organizations. However, it does come with its caveats. The more we prop it up, the more the question of complexity becomes critical, especially if we take into consideration the temporal separation mentioned earlier. We believe that central and an independently governed actor is crucial, along with its supporting relevant agencies, to balance complexity and simplicity of ESG. When we take into account social factors, which are qualitative and ever shape-shifting under different social contexts, it's not easy. And hence, such an actor is very much needed. Furthermore, we believe that it is imperative that this system is made commercially viable through selected intermediaries, which in turn provide accreditation to firms in order to promote transparency and accountability. So to conclude, ESG is essential for sustainable and responsible business practices. To address the challenges mentioned before, global governance with credible institutions and collaboration is critical. And finally, balancing complexity and simplicity is key, and commercialization through intermediaries can enhance ESG's effectiveness. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Breaking down complexity to simple metrics that everyone can understand and use is quite a challenge. And thank you so much for your ideas and the work you put into this. The second proposal will be about democracy. And we talked a lot in recent days about how the younger generation has actually been shortchanged because in many societies, the average age is it's way too high to really reflect the concerns for a future-oriented policy and on climate change. And I'm happy to introduce Marco, David, and Andrea, who are ready to take the stage talking about climate change. Is it time for a global democracy? Is there a way to construct mechanisms of global representation? And should they provide for representation skewed towards young generations? Here you have representatives of the young generations presenting a proposal.
Hi everybody, thank you. Okay, so we're talking about a very complex topic. We know that COPs, and so climate agreements, are not functioning because they're not effective and not efficient. And so what we want to do is shifting from a model of climate negotiation to a global governance that really tackle the problem and can solve the problem. There is a problem of enforcing mechanisms with the climate negotiation, and so we try to develop some proposal. The first one is strengthening the climate and planetary emergency governance in the global public interest. How do we want to do that? First of all, we need to streamline and focus on COPs so that they are more efficient and they talk about only key points. There are mitigation, adaptation strategy, knowledge exchange, finance, and accountability. We want to introduce a citizen assembly and accountability mechanism so that the NFDs of the countries are really taken into consideration and to establish an independent organization that really can control over it and establish the fairness and effectivity of those measures. Also, we want to establish a scientific capacity for Earth system governance so that it can kind of coordinate all the science we have to develop and deliver for having only one system of control about the all planetary boundaries and all the science about it. We need a declaration of planetary emergency and establish an emergency platform that works as a hub for many initiatives, such as global higher education exchange between university or research center about sustainability and climate topics across the world, so that there is an exchange of knowledge and so that we can talk about those topics with science-based consideration. An international policy innovation hub to enhance those policies and have a debate about it, and also establishing a green licensing hub so that we can exchange the IP that are useful for the ecological transition.
The second group of proposal is related with global public finance and the reform of United Nations. Particularly for global public finance, we believe that global governance for climate change should also have fiscal and financial power. So we imagine different measures like a global wealth tax and also the reform of Bretton Woods as it emerged from yesterday's panel. Related with the reform of the United Nations, we want that the United Nations can be a real democratic and representative institution to deal with global problems like climate change. And so we think to create a UN Parliamentary Assembly that is able to go beyond the principle one country, one vote, and so to follow a proportionality principle. This UN Assembly at the beginning can have just advisory function to influence the decision-making process of United Nations, but then we think that gradually should also be enforced by enforcement function.
Okay, so to conclude with respect to what my colleague said before and try to consider some of what our group has identified as cross-cutting issues, which are relevant topics that apply to all levels of the proposal that we've just shown you. So we identified three main topics, which are youth involvement, education, and the role of the media. So concerning youth involvement, we brought up the idea that young people are progressively marginalized. We are getting less relevant in terms of demographics. We have way more aged people, overage people, rather than we have young people. The population pyramid is shifting. So we identified some proposals, some concrete proposals to involve the youth in different levels of assembly that we identified before, which are lowering the legal voting age at 16, digital voting to youth participation, and finally youth quotas, so a share of representation that is granted to young people in the assembly. And then later on we acknowledge the importance of education, either through a global exchange program or through other research initiatives, especially looking at the global higher education exchange program. We thought about a network of sustainability-related masters that would connect together at world level to tackle an issue that, as you all know, is global. And finally, talking about the role of the media, it was clear since the beginning that media play a key role and that covering climate change is a pressing issue, and it's important to have awareness, and it's also a matter of functioning of democracy. Uninformed democracy is a better democracy. So that's all from us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks for the applause. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for the applause. They just stopped short of a revolution, and those of you who are older, you also might have children at home. And myself, as a university teacher and as a mother of two children in their early 20s, I know that these issues are very, very pressing. Yeah, we will get to the role of the media later, but now we will, from all this complexity and really changes in big-time changes in international governance and political systems, we now go to a very practical working group, which was around neutral cities. And you all know that cities are the best experimentation grounds for innovation, because it's about testing concepts, testing effects, because they will show effects much earlier, and you can implement things much faster. So the title here is Neutral Cities Fine-Tune the Experimentations to Achieve Zero Emission, Zero Waste in the Last Mile Delivery of Food. Very concrete proposal here, presented by Marie and Laurent. Thanks.
automated deliveries, which of course are also more sustainable and usually provide efficiency gains for companies. So yeah, that's what we had in mind. It was quite a specific topic, but we tried to come up with some comprehensive and applicable solutions. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, and I particularly like the suggestion of nudging, because we all need to change behavior. Not only companies need to change strategies, but people need to change behavior, and that's the key. And nudges really help to make sound choices, because surveys say that actually most people really want something to be done to curb global warming, climate change. So thanks a lot. And now we will get to the final working group proposal. This is actually the key. It's the energy transition, because without the energy transition, we'll have problems, because the move to e-mobility wouldn't really make a difference. The use of AI, artificial intelligence, whatever, will really increase energy consumption tremendously. So we really need the energy transition. And our last panel, our last proposal will be presented by Chanda, Olivia, and Leo. Energy transition as a lever for social justice. How can we make the climate and energy transition an agenda for all? Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We are Problem Solving Group 4, and we have been talking about the energy transition and its social implications. So we started from the concept of just energy transition, which is the transition from fossil fuels to low carbon technologies, which has also to be equitable in terms of costs and benefits, and is supposed to be able not to leave anyone behind. So then, okay. We started from two examples in which the transition was not actually just. So the very first one is from India. So in India, we have a lot of regions which are basically based on the coal sector. And the coal sector is not just a sector there, it's a whole ecosystem. So basically more than 50% of the GDP of these regions is directly linked to coal. And what is happening is that at national level, but also at company level, there's an ambitious plan to decarbonize everything. And so up to 50% of coal mines have been closed in many regions. And also the ones that are still open are slowly becoming more unprofitable. And so the main concern for these regions is that there's an unplanned closure of these coal mines from an environmental, social, and economic perspective. But there are also a lot of opportunities, perhaps, because we could take this land and give it back to the populations, the inhabitants that were actually deprived and forcibly deprived of the land in the first place. And then the second example that we had is the Three Gorges Dam in China. It is actually the biggest dam in the world in terms of installed capacity, with 22 gigawatts. And it is a massive construction, but what happened there is that up to 1.4 million people were actually displaced, and families were actually disrupted and taken from their land, and a lot of farmlands were closed. And so there was no plan and no consideration for the actual social implications of this massive project, which is actually essential for the country in its decarbonization journey.
As you may already know, this subject is broad and complex, and we unfortunately didn't have time to tackle every aspect of it. But I'm going to resume for you 4 main points that we could discuss. So the first one is that there is a need of balancing clean energy transition and land use. So the rapid implementation of clean energy transition policies that are thus increasing the number of renewable energy infrastructure, of course, have positive impacts, but it's crucial to consider the long-term effect on land use. This implementation may sacrifice the land use for housing, for example, or use for food production. That can maybe on the long run affect food stability and security. The second point is that it's important to engage research centers and university in addressing real-world challenges. There is often a lack of actionable data and scoping for addressing complex problems, leading to top-down approach that may not be effective in every case. And the bottom-up solutions developed by communities need support, financing, and guidance to be scaled up effectively. The third point is related to education and awareness that plays a vital role in the energy transition. It's important to develop educational programs that align with a country's actual need and involve university, high schools, and institutions to build local capacity and knowledge to have a successful transition. So, for example, solutions for the big North countries usually are not feasible in the big South countries. And the fourth and last point is concerning governance and local context. Governance strategy should involve the bottom-up approach, involving all local actors and fostering trust among stakeholders.
All right, thank you, Olivia. So now on to the possible recommendations we came up with. As you can see on the slides, these are kind of all broad topics, but if you go look into the document we produce, you can see the concrete cases, the topics we discussed in more details. So following the discussions Olivia just mentioned, we extracted the following recommendations. So firstly, it's education. So it's like education, but more specifically on the actual risks presented to us. Like as we have seen also in the earlier plenaries of the conference, the perception, the acknowledgement part of climate change is there. It's quite substantial, but there seems to be a lack of like the perception of the actual local risks that people face. So it's also related to the second point I'll raise next, but we definitely need for the researcher organizations to reach the community and for the education under that perspective. So next point is research, but research with a closer research base to the local community needs. Because again, as Olivia mentioned, the issues that local municipalities, first of all, tend to lack the data. And even if they do, they don't really have the analytic capabilities. So what we need to do is to gather data on the local communities level and to collaborate and tackle specific challenges in junction. And also, relating to the 2 points that I just raised, this one was kind of surprising to me, but we kind of realized that there was sort of a lack of an entity aggregating like local level success stories in a substantial way. And so there was like a lack of the spread of those stories. And you know, like Olivia said, this kind of leads to top-down solutions being slapped on, which leads to not great outcomes sometimes. So we definitely need some sort of forum to share those success stories so that we can then like harness those local success in a global level. So lastly, it's job creation. It's a obvious one, I guess. But I wish we could have had more time to discuss it. But like the concrete options, like the one that Olivia mentioned, according to the country-specific net zero job specifications need. But yeah, we just need to create jobs focused on the marginalized, first of all. That is in turn backed up by the educational capacities, looking into the span of like 10 years in the future. So our points skewed more on the educational knowledge side and specifically more mainly in the Global South context. But yeah, obviously it's a vast topic, and we're open to any feedbacks. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks also for the applause and really the issue that there should be an emphasis on the local. This is really important, listening to local communities, listening to local experts, because there's a lot of knowledge out there in this world, in the global north and the global south, and if we can't really get access to that knowledge, we will not be able to master the energy transition. But there's hope, and thanks for your great work. The next panel is, I already said it in the beginning, on climate journalism. It's in cooperation, and we are very thankful for this, with the Italian Association of Journalists. And I can tell you this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I've been a journalist all my life. I spent decades of my life in newsrooms, also in leadership roles, in journalism education. And I'm very, very happy to introduce this panel here to you. I have a double role here, not only as chair of the conference, but also as an introducer. But we will discuss climate journalism with two esteemed colleagues, Pilita Clark of the Financial Times and Karim Ayoub from Al Jazeera. And I would ask you up on the stage. Are you here? Yeah, Pilita is here. She's a veteran environmental reporter, and she can tell you a bit more later. And yeah, why don't you have a seat, because we'll spend some time here. and Karim, is he here? Maybe he will join us later. Okay. Yes, and I'll switch to the. I'll get started with this presentation. I'll move over to this one. Thanks for the technicians. The team here has been spectacular on these 3 days, like managing. Yes. No, managing all these different locations and managing all the technical issues, terrific. First, to have an introduction to the topic, I will present a report that I was commissioned to do with two colleagues from Oxford by the European Broadcasting Union, which is the world's largest association of public service media. There are public service, it's called European, but there are public service media from all over the world are part of this, and the report was targeted actually that all decision makers in the media industry, it's been read quite a bit, widely spread. And the title is Climate Journalism That Works. And why is it climate journalism that works? Well, because there has been, and Pilita will tell you later, excellent climate journalism around for many, many years. In fact, this issue has been out in the open for like 3 decades almost, and there have been, at least with the big major media brands, environmental reporters, very knowledgeable colleagues, also science reporters. But actually, many news organizations have never really measured the impact that climate journalism really had on people. So we have this contradiction that there's tons of, or this tension that there's tons of knowledge out there, but really the question is, does climate journalism have an impact? And many newsrooms felt that, well, maybe not, maybe we should refocus, maybe we should really accumulate some strength to really produce journalism that has an impact, which is important, of course. And there has been a lot of polarization in the climate journalism issue, unfortunately. Unfortunately, for some people, it's like, oh, this is Green Party politics. But it's actually not, because actually the majority of the world's population is really very much interested in having changes, affecting changes to secure the future of their children and their communities. So really, for those editors who still think like, oh, you know, maybe we shouldn't do too much climate journalism, or maybe we should hire an expert who has, or we should book an expert with a different opinion. This is really not optional. Climate change is the largest predictable risk for humankind. And as Francesco pointed out the other day, it's not about the planet. The planet will be there, hey, but it's a risk, the biggest predictable risk for humankind. So we as journalists are really obliged to help people making sound decisions for themselves, their children, and their communities. Yeah, the task with this report was how to craft journalism about climate change that resonates with people. Really, it's always hard to access impact, but it's very practical and everyone can download it for free. All the journalists who are listening here, also maybe the live stream, you can download it for free from the EBU webpage. And it's very practical. It includes case studies, including one of the Financial Times, and we heard this term gamification earlier. The Financial Times developed a spectacular climate game where you can really assess your abilities to achieve net zero in a certain part of time in a gamification study. So, and there will be interviews and there are resources. There's a glossary, what every editor needs to know about climate change, literature, recommendations, and really resources if you are not sure about things, you know, who you could turn to for help. We interviewed more than 40 media leaders, experts, academics, communication specialists on climate change, communications and climate change across the world. We accessed the latest research, and while this report definitely has a Western bias, and I really have to emphasize this, we really try to get at least some voices in from other continents, with voices from India, from Africa, to make this a whole global effort. But journalists from all over the globe feel free to contribute and to add to the experience. This is the team: Catherine Dunn from the Oxford Climate Journalism Network and Felix Simon from the Oxford Internet Institute. We did this, the three of us. And what are our key findings? Finding number one, and also the young people here, the students who presented the findings, they'll confirm this. It is really late. The media has only started to tackle climate journalism like sort of 5 years ago. Many media companies have gotten serious, and Felita will talk about that later, which is a shame actually, because actually the issue has been very obvious since the 1980s. But unfortunately in the early 2000s, it got into this political polarization thing, and it was sort of, you know, as I said, connected with green politics, and so many editors didn't feel comfortable placing too much emphasis on this. And actually, we chose the image of Greta Thunberg here because our suspicion is really, and there's no proof, but our suspicion is that the Fridays for Future movement really made a difference, because many editors-in-chief had maybe teenage children at home who were suddenly really interested in this issue. And at the same time, when they were at work, they saw that, you know, audience figures by young people, young news consumers wouldn't be that great. So they felt, maybe we should do something for young people, and actually maybe my kids are really involved in this, so shouldn't we do something in the newsroom? So that's really when this really started to get serious. And then the pandemic came, and then it pushed to the side, but still now there's many newsrooms out there who started to really engage in this. Second, there's too much doom and gloom in climate journalism, and obviously there are fascinating pictures of forest fires, of flooding, whatever. But if people are confronted with all these doomy, gloomy pictures, they'll just shut off. They'll just feel like, oh God, I'm scared. I don't want to do this any longer. I don't want to confront myself with this any longer. I can't do anything about it anyway. So climate journalism really needs more focus on explanation and solutions. Number three, and I already mentioned that there is tons of knowledge out there, but everyone who's involved in communication research, communication science, knows that facts alone don't help. The messenger is often more important than the message. So it's really important how you pick your messenger who brings across a certain message, and that really depends on the audience you want to target. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for that. But the number one predictor of why people change their behavior is really when their peers change their behavior. So if there is someone who's in the same situation changing the behavior, then it's more likely that your journalism will have or that you will change your behavior, and journalism will have an impact. Yeah, then this is a newsroom internal thing, but since many journalists are listening here, there are too many silos. And I already said that there's been excellent climate journalism around, but it's just been siloed in the science section and the environment section. It really has to permeate all sections, in particular business reporting, and Felita will talk about that as coming from a business that, like the world's best business publication, I would dare to say here, really how to make it part of all beats. That also means that basic climate literacy is a must for all journalists, particularly also for talk show hosts and everyone who's actually leading interviews, because you really need to challenge your guests sometimes when they just say something that's plain wrong. So there needs to be basic climate literacy. There is no one-size-fits-all model, not only for all audiences, but obviously not for all publications. Like a local publication will have a different task ahead than a national publication or a business publication. And then last but not least, the media has a hard time living up to their own standards. And this is really a credibility issue. And in fact, the media organizations as businesses really have been lagging behind in measuring carbon footprints and thinking about climate strategy, because many of them are medium-sized companies. They don't have investors that could shift their funds away, their money away. And yeah, it hasn't been at the forefront of their thinking, but the audience will know, they will notice at some point. This will be a credibility issue when you have commentary in your commentary section, like, we need to do something, we need to tackle climate change, but at the same time, you're running this really outdated facilities. And I know there is a cost issue in the media industry, but really you at least have to be transparent about it and really tackle it. Yeah, just briefly, this is here you can see the world newspaper coverage of climate change or global warming in the past decades. This is a graphic that was compiled by the University of Colorado. They have been measuring this, and you can clearly see how climate journalism developed, and you can also clearly see that it sort of peaked around major events, climate conferences, COPs maybe, but it's gotten more important, so you can really see there is some effort being taken now. I've talked a lot when I did climate journalism workshops with different media organizations about why climate journalism is so hard, and I won't run you through all these things because we are here to produce solutions and not risks, challenges, whatever. But there are certainly lots of things why people avoid climate news. It's very often perceived as more of the same. It's information overload. There's a lot of negativity, political polarization. It's too complicated. Maybe it's not been broken down properly. So there's tons of reasons why people avoid climate change. And this is from the Reuters Institute in Oxford, where I used to work. So this is from colleagues there. A very good report on climate coverage. Here you can see again, and this has come up during the conference quite a bit, that polarization is not an issue editors should pay too much attention to, because this is, I've taken this is from Yale University, and I've taken this graph to just from the US. This is US data, and the US is a politically very polarized society, but you can see even there's just a small fraction of people being dismissive of climate change issues, but there's a huge fraction of people, a huge proportion being alarmed or concerned. And if you are an editor and you feel like you should cater to just the dismissive part, then you're not doing your job. You should cater to the majority of people who are concerned. And the fun thing about doing a study like this is you get to interview lots of people. And who did we interview here? We interviewed actually a comedian. And Matt Winning is not only a comedian, Matt Winning is actually an environmental economist. Why did I put this quote here? Because he, as an environmental economist, he used to be an investment banker, at some point said why don't I? And he did stand-up comedy just for fun in the evenings. And at some point he said, maybe I should merge this. And then he said in our interview, this quote, because there are lots of people not being reached by climate journalism. And this quote was, we have to make content for people we don't make content for. We have to make content for people, journalism for people. We don't make journalism for. You could also say that because it's essential that climate journalism reaches everyone. And why don't you use humor? Humor has proven to be a very effective tool because actually many people, probably including many here in the auditorium or on the screen, many people feel guilty about their own climate behavior. Maybe, and you know, if you are in a room with other people, you laugh about this, you laugh about the jokes, then you will laugh about yourself a little bit, and that, you know, takes the guilt away, and maybe you feel like, you know, yeah, we are all in the same boat, we should maybe do something. So humor is a very effective communications tool. Actually, others are experimenting with this as well, and it's been worth it reading the interview with Matt Winning because this is really a key. We are producing lots of climate journalism, but who's really using it? Who's accessing it? This is also taken from the University of Colorado that is very advanced on this. Professor Maxwell Boykov. When I talked to him for the interview, he only had 15 minutes, and usually these interviews go for like an hour, and I said, 15 minutes, that's not exactly a lot. And he said, well, let's dive right into this. And I said, okay, can you tell me what's the kind of climate journalism that is successful, that has an impact? And he said, okay, let me tell you 5 points, and I found those convincing, so I present them here, which is stories that focus on the here and now. And it's obviously, sadly, gotten easier to do these stories because climate change has been around us all summer long. We've seen all these temperatures. This is not normal what we have here today as a temperature. Stories that focus on the here and now, but also on the solutions that are already being developed and are in place. And there are so many good examples, great examples from all over the world of solutions that are already implemented and, you know, focus on what's out there. Stories with local context. People really feel they want to know, why is this important to me? And as journalists, you all know that this is really what you should be focusing on, because this is your job as a journalist to really zero in on the local context. Why is this important to me is a question that people ask when they access your content. Then, and third point, and we also touched on this a lot during this conference, stories that emphasize the benefits of change. And in climate journalism and also in climate communication, very, very often there's this completely negative tone to it. Like it's all about victims, it's about sacrifice, it has been a lot about cost recently, overwhelming issues. But really, what are really the positive effects? And we talked about this conference, like for example, fighting air pollution, which was a major health issue on this planet, particularly in urban areas. We should have a much higher quality of life. Decentralizing the energy economy should give more and more people access to energy all over the world and really lower the political pressures in very centralized, very centrally dominated energy systems. And we also talked about how to measure growth. Really, isn't there a way to measure growth that is beyond the current GDP, that also measures not only negative, but also not only positive impacts, but also negative impacts? So aren't there tons of stories out there that we can tell about the better world we are envisioning? And this is what Vision is all about, and this is also why I'm a part of Vision Think Tank. Yeah, then number 4, it's about stories where people find agency and solutions. The image didn't pop up, but that doesn't matter. People want to do something, they want to contribute something, and climate journalism should tell them, you know, what can you do without neglecting the bigger picture that actually lots of structural change is needed. But people need to feel some agency also, because they need to feel, I can make a difference. Even with my voting behavior, I can make a difference. And then number 5, it's about sophisticated journalism, really approaching different audiences differently, the messenger is more important than the message very often. And this should really be fun. This should be exciting for journalists. And Wolfgang Blau here, who is a pioneer of climate journalism studies, he's the co-founder of the Oxford Climate Journalism Network. He says, we are looking at the biggest reconstruction story since World War II, and journalists should love to tell that story. Here I just pulled up 3 case studies we have in the report. I don't want to spend that much time on them. I just found it amazing when I asked the editor-in-chief of the Norwegian public television for an interview, and she said, "Oh, let me send you our climate strategy before that." And I was like, wow, there's actually someone with a climate strategy, and this is something that all media organizations should have, you know, principles for how to produce climate journalism that works really. Another example is YouTube, is Deutsche Welle. It's a German public broadcaster broadcasting all over the world. They don't broadcast in Germany, with a mission to support democracies really. And they are very, very successful with young people all over the world with their YouTube and TikTok channels on climate journalism. They have this format, Planet A. It's very approachable, catering to young people. Check it out. Very successful, and it took a little bit to establish it, but now it's been great. It's been taken up quite a bit. And lastly, a third example, and Felita later can tell you of the FT more in depth, but last example I pulled out here is AFP, Agence France Presse, the news agency, with their Future of the Planet Hub. And what they did is they merged their business section with their environment section. And this had an immediate effect, because suddenly reporters shared their sources, they read each other's texts, they looked over each other's productions, and they really saw, hey, you know, we can not only, like business reporters realized, we can't only just quote CEOs, investors, and analysts, but hey, let's ask scientists too about, you know, is this greenwashing or is this not greenwashing, or what are the probabilities this solution will work? So they really had a huge effect, and also what they really focused on, and I really liked the video that you saw, that you watched at the introduction. They focused on a strong visual strategy, very positive. You need positive images to contrast all the flooding, the wildfires, all the disaster visual coverage of climate journalism. You consciously need to seek out also positive imagery to envision that world that we are aspiring to. Yeah, I don't want to go into this. This is just part of the report. If you want to use that for your newsroom, 7 questions to check your climate strategy. We included this because actually there are many newsroom leaders who feel like, oh yeah, in a survey they said that we have a climate strategy. But in fact, during our research, we didn't really find too many newsrooms who had a climate journalism strategy. So this is a strategy, like a roadmap for your strategy check that you could use. Yeah, finally, and this was our conclusion, and I advise this to everyone who is confronted with newsroom leadership, editors who still have doubts about should we invest in climate journalism, maybe people are not consuming it, maybe this is not a business model. And my hypothesis is, and we really found this was the essence of the report is really, if you invest in your climate journalism and everything that it takes to produce great climate journalism, you will help all of your journalism flourish and survive. So investing in sustainability journalism will make all of your journalism more sustainable. Why is this? Because today's journalism is stuck so much in the now, and too much is reported and too little is explained, but particularly young audiences are interested in the future, they are invested in the future, and at the same time there's this challenge. I already mentioned that newsrooms need to reach young audiences, so an investment in climate journalism will really be an investment in journalism's survival, because many young people don't see the need for journalism any longer, because they feel, you know, everyone can be a content creator, there's enough information out there, we don't need journalism any longer. No, invest in great journalism and you will invest in journalism's survival. Second point, climate journalism needs hope, and we actually had this hope framing before the hope framing came up here. That was taken, as Francesco said, from the movie. Journalism needs to hope to inspire action, and constructive and solutions journalism are a way forward. And this doesn't only apply to climate journalism, but to all kinds of journalism. It's way too negative. It's way too much on, you know, chasing the next event, too little constructiveness in there. In climate protection, what counts is really what has been done, you know, what has been achieved. The Earth doesn't care about declarations and concepts and quotes, but today's journalism still focuses too much on what has been said, on quotes, and journalism that will have an impact, that will focus on data rather than quotes, and that is more exhausting. That takes a lot more work to focus on data than just to, you know, pin down some quotes, but luckily we will have more data with a data-driven society in the future, so please, to your job, focus more on data. Number 4 is really about approaching audiences. Approaching audiences with respect in a language they understand, and that also applies to all of your journalism. Don't talk from high up here, don't talk down to people, don't talk in a language that is maybe well received in the scientific community, but no one really gets what you're talking about. Use the right language, approach your audiences, but also with respect, and listen to them, acknowledge their expertise, as it was said earlier. Also, you know, different parts of the world, they're not only Western experts that tell everyone what's going to happen. Journalism really needs to become much more diverse and inclusive, and that's also true for all of journalism. Then, and the group before here already addressed that, climate journalism needs to be local, and that's actually been a mistake of journalism in the digital age, that it attempted to get too much to reach and really neglected the local environments, because it was always thought like, oh, if we just get reach, we'll pay our bills, this will pay our bills through advertising. Well, it was wrong. Now, media organizations ask their consumers to pay for the journalism, and to make them do that, they need to present the unique position they are in, and really produce stuff that matters to actually their particular audience, and really to the local audience. And this is also not only valid for climate journalism, but for all of journalism. Yeah, 6.6 is journalism needs to have an impact, and newsrooms should really focus more on what kind of impact their journalism has, because everything else is a waste of time. There's so much journalism produced just to impress your editor-in-chief, or just to impress the competition, or just because it's always been done that way. But you really need to measure actually who's actually consuming the stuff that we are producing, and you really need to adjust output and demand. And I've been working in consulting quite a bit and helping with digital transformation. That's one of the major issues that we say, like, you should go for engagement impact. And lastly, cooperation, collaboration really is essential in a topic that is so global, in a topic that is interdisciplinary, and vision is a great example of how to bring together people from different disciplines to try to talk to each other and make each other understand each other, even though everyone has their own expert language. So journalism really needs to be much more collaborative. Maybe there are also opportunities to collaborate with other news organizations for maybe projects that are more expensive, and also the climate doesn't know boundaries and these silos. Really, cooperation is important in a modern connected world, and I tend to say collaboration is the new competition. And this is taken from Nanette Brown, and I'll conclude with that. United Nations, she's the chief communications, she runs the communications campaigns on the United Nations, and her boss tends to be very, very alarming. Nanette takes him on a more pragmatic approach, and she says, and this is really a great fit to this conference, we want to hook people on hope and not on fear. Thank you very much. Okay, let's start with the conversation, and I've talked too much already. So, Pilita, maybe, I mean, we just talked last night in this beautiful setting at the hydro power electric plant on this wonderful terrace looking on Lake Garda, and you told me all about your impressive career in climate journalism and what you have, you know, what you have seen, and the frustrations, but also the hopes, and yeah, the advantages, the progress that you have witnessed. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Oops, can people hear me?
I think it will.
I think that, does that work? Yeah. Well, I think I was talking about the fact that when I became the FT's environment correspondent, in what seems like the dark ages now, but it was 2011. There was just one of me, and there'd only ever been one of me. And I was replaced by another environment correspondent when I became a columnist in 2017. Again, there was just one of her. Until suddenly we started, our coverage of climate just started to explode. In 2019, we launched a newsletter called Moral Money, which focused on ESG. Gillian Tett, who some of you in the audience will know, pioneered that. And then we launched a climate hub, which was really a kind of an aggregating page on the website, so that when you click on the homepage of the site, you see a button saying climate, which is a really big deal, because getting one of those buttons on a homepage, I mean, I'm sure every journalist watching will know this, that it's a really big deal to get a link there, because that means that you just get a lot more readers to your topic and your subject. So that happened. We then appointed a climate news editor, or climate editor, who basically is in charge of trying to coordinate coverage, or at least keep an eye on coverage around the paper. And we appointed a second dedicated climate correspondent who was working with the person doing my old job. And then in Brussels and in Washington, in particular, we have someone whose main job really now is covering climate change. So, you know, that's kind of been a big change. It's not absolutely unique by any stretch. You know, we've seen publications around the world, as your report, your excellent report, I might add, documents. You know, there's just, I think the Washington Post at one point announced, what was it, 30 people they were going to have covering climate. New York Times, Guardian, LA Times, a lot of the American papers, over the same time frame. Really interesting question why that happened. I mean, I think I kind of agree with you that Greta, Fridays for Future, had a big impact, but something else happened in 2018 that I think really revolutionised the way people thought about and think about climate change, and that was the publication of that Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on what the world would look like at 1.5 degrees. And the big thing in that report was it basically said, if we don't halve our emissions roughly by 2030 and bring them down to net zero by about 2050, we haven't got much hope of keeping temperatures to 1.5 degrees. And people before then had been thinking in a much more sort of nebulous way. I mean, maybe if we keep this carbon budget, whatever that is, to a certain level of gigatons, whatever they are, then we might be able to sort of, you know, keep temperatures to a reasonable degree, whatever that is. Suddenly, it became a lot easier, I think, for people to grasp mentally just how urgently we needed to not just bring down emissions. Where did emissions come from? Fossil fuels. And so that's why fossil fuels, I think, really became went into focus much more acutely than they had before.
Mm-hmm. The new, well, she's not any longer the very new editor-in-chief, but when Rula came in as an editor-in-chief, I think she made climate as a priority with the FT. Have you seen internal resistance? Because the approach is, as, if I understood this correctly, to make it part of all, like, you know, the investment reporting, companies reporting, whatever. Have you seen and witnessed resistance by colleagues who feel like, oh, you know, I've never done it this way and I don't really feel like I should be doing it this way?
I wouldn't say that it's not that people are concerned about doing things in a different way. I would say that people who, you know, watch our audience engagement figures closely, and of course that's really easy to do on most publications now, they'll see, as you documented in your report, that very often climate stories don't get that much readership. Also, they feel as though, you know, as you also make clear, I think, in the report, this stuff just feels so familiar. It feels like we're telling the same story over and over again. One of the reasons I'm glad that I'm on a business newspaper actually is because that's not really the case with business. Business is one area where things are really happening, changing, and people are starting to make money. And that's another thing that really, I think, changed the way probably a lot of people inside the FT started to think. When Tesla suddenly started to have a bigger market cap than Ford and GM combined, which actually I think it still does, and very much still does. When people started to see that you could actually make money from clean energy, from cleaner cars, from cleaner electricity, that was, you didn't need to convince a news editor anymore. I mean, before you might have had to go, I would go up to the news desk when I was environment correspondent and say, oh, there's this really interesting wind farm company and they're putting a new wind farm in up somewhere off Scotland. I think we should really be doing something on it. And I'd be just met with blank stares, like, who cares? How many investors are we talking about? What sort of revenues? What sort of, we're a business newspaper. Well, of course, that has changed dramatically. So, and what's also changed, and one of the reasons I was always keen to write about climate change for a business newspaper, even though it kind of happened quite accidentally in my case, but still, it was always going to be the case that the business story of climate change and the economic story, but particularly the business story, was going to be the most fascinating to cover, because not only did you have a whole new swathe of companies starting up, but these existing legacy companies, particularly the fossil fuel companies, the big oil and gas companies, I mean, they are just a fascinating story, what they're going through as they tell the world that, and actually a lot of senior people inside really do want to make a big transition. But how they go about doing that has just been something to behold. And, practically every month this year, we've seen some extraordinary stories coming out of the big Western oil majors in Europe in particular, BP and Shell, where one year they're setting out their new climate strategy and it's going to be this brave new green world and they're committed to renewables, and then war in Ukraine next year, pulling back from that, disappointing huge numbers of investors, but pleasing, of course, many more. So, that it's a really interesting dynamic story, and I don't think that's going to wait. I think that'll just intensify.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist. I could keep on asking questions, but if you in the audience have questions, if there's questions, then please think about them. Yeah, I'll get to you. Yeah, okay. If someone could maybe move a microphone down here. Yeah, it's hard to see. I know it's particularly hard to see for me with all the lights here, but please go ahead.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Martin Powell from AXA. You've talked a lot about how you engage audiences, and it's fantastic because you're both very credible journalists. But what about journalism that exaggerates the facts and that people write to be provocative and edgy, but then actually disengages people simply because those facts aren't true or they're exaggerated? How do you think about that? Because you've talked very much about getting people on board and getting people engaged, and it's great. But I'm very interested in the other, because it's quite damaging and it's sending us backwards.
Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I think for those of us who live in the UK, for example, there are several examples of exactly what you're talking about in the mainstream media. But of course, in social media, that is happening all the time. It's very difficult to control, frankly. But one thing I would say about, particularly when it comes to newspapers, of which there are several in the UK that repeatedly exaggerate and don't necessarily always portray policies and news in the way that the FT, for example, does. But one thing that I think is important is for people to take advantage of the processes and the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks that exist, and actually write in, because people were doing that for a long, long time. When I first started, it was what you're talking about was happening, I would say, far more. So that's what it feels like to me. I mean, every story you wrote about climate change would just get so many virulent, ridiculous comments underneath online that we actually stopped allowing comments under climate change stories for quite a while, as if they were, you know, legally problematic, or about Iran, or about China, or, you know, the typical sort of story that attracts a huge number of problematic comments. So we never do that now, because it feels to me as though the overwhelming bulk of sentiment and views are very much, as Alexandra reflected in the report, that people are generally alarmed and generally are concerned and want to see change. But that's not to diminish the fact that, you know, on certain key issues, on some issues like, for example, you know, air pollution in London suburbs, it's very easy to have media coverage that sways opinion in a fairly unhelpful way.
Yeah, and I mean, there will always be bad journalism. I mean, that's a fact. So the more important it is that people like you, everyone who's responsible in an organization, tries to find also allies among journalists, and ideally also among leadership of news organizations, to really highlight, you know, what the real world looks like. That there needs to be, obviously, you know, a lot more climate literacy in newsrooms. Unfortunately, yeah, it will never be a perfect world. Even the world of journalism will never be perfect. But everyone needs to make an effort, and there needs to be a lot more communication also from scientists with journalists. And also Matt Winning, the comedian, said in this interview that actually it's so sad that actually scientists put like 95% of their effort into doing science, and just less than 5% maybe even in communicating what they've really seen and what they've... I think there needs to be an improvement on that part of the world also, and also in the business community. And what Pilita just said, and would you agree that actually the business sector is actually been much further ahead of the media industry in, you know, developing climate strategies and stuff?
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As you say, a lot of media organisations are small or medium-sized businesses, and unlike often larger companies that are able to have much more detailed and credible climate strategies. And you're completely right that generally speaking, climate strategies are coming sort of second and third and fourth after other corporate strategies in the media. I'd agree with that. But I think that is starting to change. And actually, one development that really does what surprised me and gives me some hope is that I come from Australia originally, where Rupert Murdoch's papers are extremely powerful and have always, almost uniformly, been extremely negative about climate change and quite contentious. And their staff became so furious about that, but also their advertisers. And they had to quite recently decide that they really had to take a new strategy, and they announced that they were going to do, I mean, they had a sort of climate, not climate week or a climate move, but anyway, they basically made a big deal about the fact that they thought climate change was important, which was quite a step up. And so I think, to your point, the fact that most large businesses now, I mean, it's very rare to hear a chief executive of a big company say that they don't really care much about climate change and they don't want to see much progress taken to tackle climate change. So, you know, when that starts permeating in the way that it has, I think, in many, many countries, then inevitably the media gets affected, or the leadership of media gets affected as well.
Yeah, that's exciting. There's one question here in front row. There are lots of microphones up here if there's a shortage. No, yeah.
Pelita, Alexander, the question is for both of you. But I sense that we are still missing a key leadership from political standpoint, or from institutional standpoint, on climate change. And I wonder, 20 years ago, there was Al Gore really taking the lead and creating a lot of awareness. Who, from a journalist standpoint, you have been identifying as, the key promoter at a more global level?
Yeah, maybe you can take that.
Well, I mean, Al Gore is still there, actually, and has just done a pretty interesting TED talk, which I would recommend people look at, which, like Antonio Guterres, who I think is also probably a leader, but it's a really interesting question. You know, we have a lot of climate conferences at the FT, or climate-related conferences, and I'm constantly being asked by our events organisers, you know, who should we be going for? Who's the really big name that we want? And we can always think of a lot of business people, you know, the Elon Musks and others, and various others involved in clean energy. But when it comes to the sort of the global leadership figure that I think you're talking about, it's an interesting one, apart from Greta, who, and I would say there's a lot of other young climate activists who, you know, Vanessa Nakate and people like that who are coming up as well, and are really making quite a big impact. But apart from those, and you know, we're talking about people who've been on the national stage now for quite a while. It's an interesting question about who else there is. What do you think, Alexandra?
Well, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if we need that one global figure, which would obviously, I mean, like, whatever, the Nelson Mandela of climate change, still waiting for that. But actually there needs to be key decision makers in certain regions that have high credibility among, you know, their audiences, their people. I think that is really important too. I mean, yeah, I think Ursula von der Leyen, being German, I might be biased knowing her also, but she's doing a good job at communicating it. But will she have, you know, this kind of pull across the world? I'm not sure. Across Europe, you know, you would hope as the president of the EU Commission. But yeah, but sometimes, as you said, like someone like Greta, who came out of basically nowhere, probably had a bigger impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I actually think that what we're missing is, in a way, not those kind of big leaders, although they're incredibly helpful. But what I have started to think about, or ask the question about, is who are the political leaders who have got not just the ideas and not just the intellectual capacity, but the political courage and ability to implement climate policies that are incredibly difficult to implement. You know, we see this all the time now as governments across the world are trying to actually bring in policies, whether it's like the German boiler policy, or in the Netherlands, their nitrogen policies, Ireland, dairy cow policy, agriculture policies. When we're starting to see governments really trying to bring in laws, rules, legislation that cuts emissions, and it's really hard. And the ones who I think are doing well at the moment, I can count probably on one hand, if that. You know, I think Joe Biden has done an extraordinary job, admittedly getting a bunch of carrots through rather than sticks in the Inflation Reduction Act, but nonetheless, an act of legislative genius in the United States, given what he was up against. In Europe, you know, there are great leaders. I think Macron has basically probably done more than most to elevate climate. Implementation has been somewhat dodgy, but still, he's not really dropped the ball at all. The UK, I mean, you know, just a shocking example of really, at the moment, unfortunately, of people who seemed to have, seem to be really wedded to a certain strategy and idea, and then when things got difficult, no, seems not. So yeah, I think that's what's really missing.
Do we have more questions? Okay, there is someone.
Hi, my name is Alex Jania. I'm a journalist. Say no abuse, don't worry, you don't need to see me. I'm really interested in this idea of reader fatigue with bad news stories. So I'm not talking about the negative, exaggerated, I'm talking about factual but bad news stories. Not just climate, but generally, and what we can do about that, because there just are lots and lots of bad news when it comes to climate, and we can't stop reporting on them. And actually, from the bad news, positive change can happen. So The Guardian, for example, did some fantastic work this year on carbon credits and the legitimacy of those projects. And from that we're seeing reforms in the industry to try and improve them. But how do we toe this line and ensure that readers remain engaged and not fatigued by bad news while continuing to report on the bad news that needs to be reported on?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Pelita should answer what's the stuff that really engages FT readers, which might be different from what engages other people. I mean, I happen to be on the board of a constructive institute in Denmark that has as its mission to push for a more constructive journalism with more examples, more explanation, actually more hope, and it shows that actually people like these stuff that is more accessible, that is very explanatory, particularly young people. They tune out if they have your traditional political journalism, like he said, she said kind of journalism. People just in general tune out. They also tune out when there's so much negativity. But if you have solutions, and if you put these solutions also in context, there's no need for exaggerating, like small scale kind of stuff, because that's always the danger of greenwashing. But if you really show what's happening across the world and really show people in your situation in other regions of the world care just as much as you do, people tend to like that. Also, bringing emotion back into quality journalism, that's one of the most important things. We were very much, we as journalists from quality publications very much left the emotional part to the tabloids. This is not right. You should really present characters people can identify with, stories that touch people, and you can see really good audience figures on that, but you know more about what's resonating with your audiences, like audience figures. I mean, you mentioned already some.
Yeah, I think we will never stop covering extraordinary events, whether it's floods in Libya or fires in Canada or, all of these events that are related to climate change. We have to cover, they're really important. We will often look for a business aspect of these stories, but not entirely, and certainly not at the beginning. We won't overlook the human aspect of it, which is just becoming, as we've heard at this conference, in quite a bit of detail. It's not something that you can ignore. I don't think we should, but I do. Personally, I get. I sympathise completely with reader fatigue and with fatigue in general about these stories. You do feel very often as though you are reading very difficult, very depressing, quite despairing stories. But I would say that, as you've emphasised, I think, Alexandra, in your report makes clear that there's huge interest in explanatory journalism, solution-based journalism. In fact, one thing that I think is really interesting is the number of startups, whether it's podcasts or websites that are devoted to climate change, is really quite large and growing. And things like Volts, which is a podcast in the US by a guy who's just fatally fascinated with electricity and green electricity and climate change. But, it's got so many subscribers that he's able to live very happily with his family and producers and whatnot and keep all of these things going. So there is hunger out there for these things, and it is being met. And I think probably mainstream media might, in some cases, be able to do a bit more of it.
Yeah, it's great. You mentioned the entrepreneurial spirit that is behind this. We are out of time. Thank you so much. I will send you to the coffee break right now. And since we started a little bit late, your coffee break gets shortened a little bit. So please be back here at 11:20. So you have to walk down, get your coffee. take your seats. I know mobility is a big issue in climate change and also when moving people from coffee breaks back to a conference room, but this is really carbon-saving mobility, just walking up the stairs, walking to your spots around here. Thanks a lot. And yeah, we are already moving to the first closing session of this conference, the Trento closing session of this conference. But before we jump right into this, we will hear some remarks. Unfortunately, Herbert Dorfmann, the member of the European Parliament, he was supposed to speak here. He couldn't make it, but he recorded a short video message. And afterwards, Mario Tonina, the Assessor for Urban Planning, Environment and Cooperation of the province of Trento, will speak to you in person. So, yeah, show the video, please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your invitation to this second edition of the Dolomite Conference on the Global Governance of Climate Change. I have to apologize for my absence today. Unfortunately, I'm not able to exchange with you in person on the output of your days of intensive work. But I will read the proposals and your concrete ideas you bring forward in the manifesto della Dolomite that will directly feed into the COP28. Your work is ambitious and at the same time important. I would like to send my greetings and congratulations for this successful event to the organizer, the Vision think tank, as well as the scientific and founding partners. You brought more than 60 decision makers, entrepreneurs, managers, scientists, journalists, interested participants together. It makes me proud to see that this conference is organized in my region in the Dolomites. The title of this year's conference, A New Hope for Climate, Action Beyond Words, is very well chosen. We all experienced this summer, once more, a strong impact on climate change. Droughts, floods, storms have been on the news every day. Here in the Alpine regions, we are experiencing temperature increases in the last decades, and this unfortunately will continue. In my region, South Tyrol, summers are on average 2 degrees and winters 1 degree warmer if we compare it to 1960. Glaciers are melting, water becomes a scarce resource, and we have major harvest failures. These changes clearly have an impact on nature, on society, and also on our economy. Climate adaptation becomes more and more challenging. At the beginning of this mandate of the European Parliament in 2019, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, presented a new Green Deal as a European answer to the challenges of climate change, with the ambition target of making Europe climate neutral by 2050. The first concrete step into this direction was the EU climate law, where this political ambition was translated into a legal obligation. By 2030, the member states have to reduce greenhouse emissions by at least 55% from the 1990 level. Some might argue that this is not enough, but already this requires an immense effort. The European Green Deal includes more than 45 measures. Many of them are already legislative initiatives that touch every sector: industry, mobility, construction, agriculture, energy, trade, and many more. The big majority of these initiatives have already been negotiated and successfully approved here in the European Parliament. The challenges we policymakers are facing are the same you discussed these days. How can we make this green transition sustainable and at the same time create opportunities for innovation, for investment, and also for jobs? But we also have to be sure that no one is left behind. This transition will either be working for all, or it will not work at all, as the Commission President said. Now I think it is important to break these goals down to the local level, to translate them into concrete measures at local, at regional level. I'm convinced that regional climate plans can play here an important role to successfully lead the transition and to reach the climate targets at regional and also at local level. With this, I wish you a good continuation of the conference. I look forward to seeing your output and wish you a successful day. Best regards here from the European Parliament.
Yeah. Now Mario Tonino, the stage is yours. Yeah.
Buongiorno anche da parte mia. Ben volentieri porto il saluto questa mattina del Presidente della Giunta Provinciale, mio personale, a questo importante momento di chiusura dei lavori della seconda conferenza delle Dolomiti. Io ero presente anche in occasione della conferenza stampa che è stata fatta qualche giorno fa nella sede della 22. Ringrazio e saluto Diego Cattoni, amministratore delegato, ma soprattutto lo voglio ringraziare per questo importante impegno che è stato garantito in occasione di questo momento che io reputo significativo, importante e strategico per il nostro futuro, ma soprattutto per il futuro delle nuove generazioni. E questa mattina vediamo molti giovani all'interno di quest'Aula, i quali giustamente su temi come quello del clima volete essere protagonisti. E io vi voglio confermare innanzitutto che attraverso il vostro impegno, attraverso il vostro protagonismo, su temi come questi voi potete incidere, ma soprattutto potete trasmettere a chi ha una responsabilità, e su questi temi dobbiamo parlare a livello mondiale, per far sì che attraverso delle azioni quotidiane che ognuno di noi può garantire si possa arrivare a dei risultati che negli ultimi anni, dobbiamo anche ammettere, non sempre ci sono stati. E credo che il richiamo fatto proprio in questi giorni da Papa Francesco con Laudate Deum, questa esortazione apostolica di Papa Francesco che viene dopo 8 anni dall'enciclica, voglia significare, ma voglia stigmatizzare che è necessario lavorare di più, che è necessario impegnarci tutti molto di più per garantire un vero futuro a voi. Poi ognuno per le proprie responsabilità, e io oggi sono qui, oltre che per portare un saluto di questa giunta provinciale, anche per confermare che il lavoro che abbiamo garantito nel corso di questa legislatura ha voluto tenere in considerazione soprattutto queste tematiche legate all'ambiente, legate al territorio, legate al paesaggio. E l'abbiamo fatto iniziando un percorso all'inizio della legislatura con gli Stati Generali della Montagna, dove temi appunto come quelli dell'ambiente hanno trovato una condivisione, hanno trovato una trasversalità di condivisione con tantissimi, e credo che questo sia il modo giusto. E attraverso poi anche atti politici che sono stati prodotti nel corso della legislatura, uno su tutti la strategia provinciale per lo sviluppo sostenibile, legato all'Agenda 2030, vada proprio in questa direzione. Ma anche documenti come quello che riguarda il clima che sappiamo, soprattutto negli ultimi anni, abbiamo visto delle situazioni che in passato non c'erano, e quindi ancora di più ci deve far riflettere. E credo che attraverso iniziative come quelle che voi giovani state garantendo ogni anno, e anche il prossimo anno con COP28 a Dubai possiate portare il vero contributo, i veri stimoli per permettere e per far sì che chi ha una responsabilità a livello mondiale ne possa tener conto. E attraverso le azioni che ognuno di noi possiamo fare, io sono certo che se ci crediamo fino in fondo e se lavoriamo in questa direzione, i risultati ci saranno. Quindi grazie ancora per queste giornate, ma soprattutto per quella che immagino sarà anche la sintesi che poi vorrò fermarmi proprio per sentire, per capire quali sono i punti strategici che voi oggi volete lasciare come questo segno dopo un lavoro importante in queste giornate. Grazie a voi e buon proseguimento.
Mille grazie. Mille grazie. Now, the closing session is starting, and Juliana Ferraino, I'll give the word to her. But before, no, you can. You can move up here, but I really wanted to insert a quick, big heartfelt thank you to the whole team, particularly Clara Donati and Margherita Curti, because they've done such a spectacular job. And once in the closing thing, very often these things get forgotten. So please give a big hand to the organizing team. Fantastic. Okay. Juliana, please, the closing session with all the proposals, all the findings, the complete wrap-up, the complete solution of the problem is now yours.
Thank you, Alexandra, and good morning to everybody. My name is Juliana Ferraino. I'm a journalist in the financial and business section at Corriere della Sera in Milan. I've been all my career at Corriere, and I'm thrilled to host and introduce the next panel, which will discuss the recommendation emerged in these 2 days of discussion reached by the 4 problem-solving groups. So please let me introduce and join the central stage Francesco Grillo, Francesco is the director of the Vision think tank and fellow of the European University Institution. Take a seat, please. Diego Cattoni, that was already mentioned. He is the CEO of Autostrada del Brennero. Welcome. Giacomo Gigantiello. CEO of AXA Italia. Barbara Kolm, former vice president of the Austrian Bank and director of the Austrian Economic Center, and finally but not least, Giovanna Melandri, president of Human Foundation and president of Social Impact Agenda for Italy. Welcome, Giovanna. So I guess I'm on the big chair. All right. So first of all, I would like to ask Francesco and Barbara to summarize and present the 8 recommendations emerged in these 2 days of discussion and that will be brought possibly to the COP28 that will start at the end of November in Dubai. Please.
Thank you so much. By the way, thanks a lot also to Mario Tonina, to the Vice President of the province of Bolzano that will welcome us briefly immediately after lunch. It is, by the way, an electoral campaign here, so it was a special effort.
We forgot Cliff Pryor.
Cliff, yeah, where is Cliff?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Cliff.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Cliff is the chairman, the president of the Global Impact Investment Group. Sorry. You'll be the first to be asked a question.
Very sorry, Cliff. As you may have realized, to organize such a complex and articulated conference it does not come without small mistakes. We lost Karim before in the plenary on climate journalism. Barbara, if you want to help a little bit with these 8 points, they were 10 and now they have been reduced to 8. Okay, so they are the elaboration in not only here, but even before of students and faculty, Bocconi and Polimi. And next year we will certainly have also University of Trento at the very least and University of Oxford students to be engaged into this exercise. Number one idea, it's about the so-called global democracy. It's a very old idea that we are discussing about since the UN were established. Here we are talking about an assembly, global citizen assembly, that would be a sort of the UN, the UN Parliament. Even the European Union had the European Parliament even before there were direct election of the European Parliament in 1978. So this will be a little bit more like an advisory board to the UN as it is. And it will be also the opportunity to experiment at that level the concept of global citizen assemblies, which is a little bit like Athens. Of course, there is an entire methodology to make the world to sort of do problem solving at that level. And you will find the details. This will be especially about engaging young people in climate decisions that have a long-term impact. Number two, how to finance the big cost of the energy transition. We're talking yesterday about something like 100 trillion US dollar in the next 30 years, which is a staggering amount of money. Here you will find some specific proposal to sort of link the future that we need to imagine, a future where the energy transition will be accomplished, will be a future where bills for utilities will be much lower. It will be a world probably much more secure than a world where we have energy concentrated in very few places. And by the way, yes? Yeah, okay. Just today we had an example, we are having an example of that tension in Israel. So basically the idea will be with banks to use the savings that the energy transition will realize when the transition is completed to finance the transition today. Transforming the loss and damage logic. This is one of probably the most controversial, but we want to discuss this thing very much in COP28. The loss and damage facility now that was the only very small sort of reference to this thing that COP27 accomplished is now meant as being some compensation between the rich and the poor. We want to transform this thing a little bit using the logic of the next generation in EU. So basically all countries of the world will contribute to the loss and damage according to their financial contribution capacity, according to their GDP. But the loss and damage will basically help any community that will be hit by climate change, or it will be used to prevent the damage to happen. Enhancing ESG sustainability. This is the most difficult, and I will leave to Cliff and Giovanna to elaborate. The starting point was that ESG are not just complex, are difficult to understand. I myself, notwithstanding that I'm the convener of the Dolomite conference on climate change, have some hard time to really still understand what impact finance is. So I will leave it to you, but our idea is to create, as the students mentioned before, a platform to solve the problem and make this black box to be more understandable. Barbara, the last 4 points, the four ideas.
Well, thank you very much. As you mentioned, the 4 remaining are city-based innovation experiments, and I think it's truly important that we do this bottom-up as well as top-down from the mayor level on the one side, but on the other side from the citizens level, and really experiment on how we should simply employ metrics and measurables. And as you mentioned before with the ESGs, there are plenty of KPIs around that can be used, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to collaborate and coordinate those things. The second point is, or actually the 6th point in this case, is the realistic emission of reduction of the timetable. I mean, we all have those long time goals, and then we kick the can down the road, as we know from the finance industry, that just takes forever until we kind of get going and do the things. So if we if we measure every year, if we at least look at the outcomes every year and then compare, because this also helps, on the one hand, the citizens, it helps the local communities, it helps the regions, it helps also the nation states, what advantages they have made, what successes they have made. This will create incentives for the people. And then talking about incentives, of course, we need incentives for sustainable behavior. And when we come as academics from behavioral economics, behavioral finance, we all know that carrots and sticks works. And we need to incentivize the entire thinking. And as the students have pointed out today earlier, it is also about education and making people understand what those things are about. And so this all goes together. And finally, this is a very focused on the grid and energy storage prioritization. So we need to, of course, look at the investments there and prioritize them, because after all, without electricity, the world is dark. And if we look at the countries that are wealthy and the countries that are poor, you all know this famous settings of the world. North Korea is dark, South Korea is light, and there are many countries in Europe, we know that, especially here, being here in the Dolomite region. The north of Italy is very light, and sometimes in the south there are places that are dark. So we need to make sure that the energy grid is working. We've been at a wonderful plant yesterday to see how things can be done in a net zero way or in a very sustainable way. And I think this is also one of the ultimate, or actually urgent, goals that can be achieved and accomplished. And this is a recommendation that we would, as the Dolomite Conference, put on the plate for people to discuss and put into practice. That would be it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Francesco. And now, while they were explaining the points, actually, I figured it out why I forgot Cliff. I wanted to reach the 5th global goal of the UN, so we would have been 3 female and 3 male on stage, and we would have reached gender parity in advance. But then, as promised, I will start from Cliff. Cliff, we have tons of investments in sustainability. They use this frame, ESG, but we still fail to measure correctly and in a standard way that can be compared. So how can we solve this problem of measurement and standardization to make it even?
I think we can.
Do you need a... Yeah.
Thing, isn't it? There's always something that you forget. It's the microphone. So I think we can solve this. Just before I say anything else, just say the outstanding speakers, the diversity of topics and discussions here is absolutely outstanding and is really, really helpful. I'm from the financial sector. The financial sector is probably one of the top 3 most powerful forces in the world. So we have to engage positively and rapidly for the climate change. Finance goes for returns. Governments can tilt those returns. The citizens, as consumers of the finance industry, can tilt things. We already are doing those tilts. But ESG is the $40 trillion elephant in the room. It is, if you look at the assets under management globally, 120 trillion, you're talking of 1/3 of the entire financial sector, and yet it is weak. ESG is weak. It needs considerable strengthening. Over the last couple of days, we've been working on how. How do we do that? We need a governance body, a trusted governance body. We need to bring all of the different actors that have been, claiming ESG, bring them in to bolster that governance. And we need to start having global accreditation systems so that from the center of that ESG right the way through every investment that's working on that. And why am I talking about ESG when actually I'm an impact investor? It's because impact investing is only 1 or 2 trillion. Oh, that may sound a lot of money, but if we want to get to 2030, the SDGs, it's very unlikely that we can get from 1 or 2 up to 40, up to 100 trillion. Whereas ESG is already there, and that's why I think we have to work on it. Just a bit more broadly, it is not very helpful generally to ask investors, the finance sector, to say, you ought to do this. It doesn't really work. Yes, you can have some activists, and the activists make some changes look, if you're wildly out here, then it suddenly looks responsible in the middle, so you can use that. But for the mainstream, it's more productive to look at how you fit the incentives to particular areas of finance. So just to have an example, the regulatory system in the EU is well advanced to any other jurisdiction, and that has tilted towards certain actions towards climate and towards and social factors. Pension funds, sovereigns, what do they care about? They do care about the long term because they are invested in the long term. And so, let's work with them. So building ESG, strengthening it, understanding the incentives, use it, build it, strengthen it, use it. Yes.
Thank you, Cliff. I would like to stay on finance and investments, and I would like to ask Giovanna, what is the role of institutional investors, and why should impact investing be at the very center?
Thank you. First of all, let me also add my voice to congratulate this conference and the very interesting and tight conversation that we had in these 2 days. And I'll sort of move from Cliff's points. We were together just a few days ago in Malaga, where the Global Impact Summit took place, something I advise you to look up also for the details of the results of that conference. It brought together 1,000 delegates from all over the world, global south, global north. And yes, I mean, somehow you can have also financial activists. I'm touching on Cliff's idea. So maybe because I am European and I have witness of what has happened in this ecosystem of ESG finance, sustainability finance, and impact finance from Europe, maybe I have not a different, but a slightly different, how could I say, hope for the developing of the impact investment, impact finance structure. So first of all, let me try and be very clear, because as Francesco was saying before, we still need to understand each other on this, no? So first, ESG is okay. It's better than nothing, okay? But it still is a way of thinking finance, capitalism, okay, in a do no harm manner. Now, this has been in place all over the world in different ways, because in Europe, this is why I'm speaking from Europe, as Cliff just said, the taxonomy that was introduced, probably even too much of a stick option taxonomy rather than a carrot option, because we need to have incentives for that kind of finance, otherwise it doesn't work. But Europe is the only theater of the world where ESG is defined. It has a regulatory definition. Good, bad, could be better, I think it could be better, but anyway, it has a definition. And even in Europe, that taxonomy has not brought to the kind of result that we want. So we need to close the financial gap. This has been said all through these 4 days. We need at least, 3-4 trillion euros to reach the 2030 Global Development Goals. Conventional, and this is the point, conventional accounting practices which are embedded in ESG. I don't know if, I want to make myself really clear on this, because it is conventional accounting practices that are still grounded on the idea that there are only 2 factors to be optimized: profit and risk. And then you have the non-financial disclosure aside from it, okay? So I think that it is generally accepted that this accounting methodology is not going to help us do the great frog jump that we need to do. Yes, I agree with Cliff. We can't say to funds, finance, entrepreneurs, do that. But we can, and we discussed this yesterday in the panel, but we can use incentives. We can use carrots. And let me give you an example, something I would like to be there. It is very different if the taxation structure of Europe, let's stay in Europe, recognize it, impact finance, because impact finance is not a 2-factor finance, it's a 3-factor finance. We want to intentionally, additionally, and measurably look at the impact of each and every investment, and not just do no harm, above that line. And if that is recognized as an asset class, which is not yet, this is the point, then you can have the financial and the tax structure to change. Why do I have to tax a capital gain of an impact fund? And by the way, there are many in Europe that are maybe small, medium-sized, at their 2nd or 3rd venture, at their 2nd or 3rd closing, impact funds on the E, on the S, on the G, which are doing great, also on the business line. And so, since you asked me institutional investors have a great role in doing this. Because institutional investors, if they are embedded in a legislation that recognize, they can be pioneers, okay? They can be pioneers in investing in impact funds, and they can help the impact movement to bring along the idea of not only not only compliance, but also carrots. An asset class of impact investment should not be taxed, the capital gain should not be taxed as a hedge fund. So we do need those 4 trillion euros of finance, but we don't need any finance. And you know that there's a huge worldwide issue now, because I said this figure yesterday, only 2% of assets under management flowing from US to the global south. This is where the deglobalization process is really occurring. And less than 4%, I think it is today, from Europe. So we have a huge need of transferring capital to the global south, but I would say not any capital. So that's my point.
Thank you, Giovanna. Now I would like to hear the voices of the companies. We have here 2 representatives. I will start with Giacomo. AXA Italy has been a founding partner for the 2nd year in a row. But why does AXA believe it's an insurance? Why does AXA believe in an initiative like this one?
Giuliana, may I start a little bit from a story, a little one that I told to Barbara this morning when we were walking here is about youth. I've got a little baby, my princess, she's 7 years old. And every night when I walk in the apartment, I leave the light on by mistake. So she's on my back and she's tapping on my back and she's saying to me, Daddy, it's not about saving money. Now this is what is the awareness of the youth on this topic. And one of the reasons why I believe is extremely important is what we have seen today from the people that have been working a lot on these. And I'm thanking the expert, but I'm thanking also the team from the university, which have been working really hard, not just today, but in the last few weeks and months. And I'm referring to the people that today we have seen on the stage: Cecilia, Antonio, Andrea, Marco, Davide. I think there is also Laurent and Marie. There is also Chandra, Olivia, and Leo. Can you please stand up? Now there is a clear element why we are here. Please do not lose the flame and the energy you have got today on the stage. I know it was not easy. Don't lose it. In 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, when you're going to have a leadership role, do not lose the flame and the attention of what you're trying to achieve today. So, Juliana, let me get back to you. This is one of the main reasons why here today. We love the idea of inclusive culture. We love the idea of sustainability for the future. And I think the idea of putting together an intergenerational approach, a multidisciplinary thinking about the future, green future, that's the reason why we like, in a way, here. I think the second element that we like is that we're not talking about just the climate change, but we have been focusing also on a social impact. I think social inclusion is the name of the game, because that is what is bringing a lot of disparity, and we need to focus on that. And this conference is also shifting the focus on that point. And the third one is that clear example puts in front of us in a very calm and assertive way from people that have been devoting the last few months, but also collecting the expertise coming from different sources. So that's why we like it, and we're standing with Autostrada del Brennero, with Vision, and Francesco.
Thank you. And let me go. Let me go to Diego Cattoni, our other company on the panel. So Autostrada del Brennero is a highway, but why should a highway support such a conference? Because when we think about roads, highways, we think about pollution, cars. So tell us your story. Why are you here?
Thank you for this question. I prefer to speak in my mother language so I can transfer better my emotion on this
Please
topic.
Do.
Ok, sì, grazie per la domanda, anche perché giustamente associare un'autostrada con tematiche relative all'ambiente e ai cambiamenti climatici, diciamo che si rimane meravigliati, no? La prima reazione che c'è. In realtà io parto un po' distante e racconto anche di questa storia particolare che ha questa autostrada per capire che l'elemento di attenzione all'ambiente, l'elemento di attenzione ai cambiamenti climatici è nel DNA della società fin dal momento che è stata costituita. Questo perché? Perché questa è l'unica autostrada che c'è in Italia che non è stata costruita dallo Stato e poi data in concessione a soggetti che la gestiscono, ma fin da 60 anni fa lo Stato aveva deciso di non fare un'autostrada in questi territori che erano molto poveri, e tra l'altro perché l'aveva considerata non strategica. Allora questi territori dove erano terra di forte emigrazione in quegli anni, dove c'era una povertà diffusa, dignitosa povertà, ma però era diffusa, è stato deciso da allora politici illuminati, ha detto non la vuol fare lo Stato, bene, la facciamo noi. Quindi questa autostrada è stata progettata, realizzata e gestita da quelli che oggi sono tutti i cittadini che abitano in quest'area che parte dal confine con l'Austria, quindi il Brennero, e arriva fino a Modena. Cittadini rappresentati da chi? Rappresentati dalle proprie istituzioni, ovvero dal comune, ovvero dalle province, ovvero dalle camere di commercio, ovvero in taluni casi anche dalla regione. Quindi la sentiamo nostra, io sono di Trento, quindi sento nostra questa autostrada, e è stata costruita con un'attenzione fortissima all'ambiente, perché proprio abitando in questi territori dove c'è un'orografia particolare, dove c'è un'attenzione anche al settore turistico, un'attenzione forte all'ambiente, quando è stata progettata c'è stata un'attenzione fortissima a coniugare il tema dello sviluppo collegato alla mobilità al tema dell'ambiente e della sostenibilità. Quindi il progetto, portare un'autostrada a 1500 metri di quota, con queste valli alpine strette, con questi paesini alpini anche particolari, si è preservato l'ambiente, si sono utilizzati anche dei materiali che fossero unici all'epoca, qui ne ricordo uno solo, come ad esempio il guarrail, che chi percorre Brennero vede, e vede di questo colore che sembra arrugginito, che uno dice ma qua non si fa neanche la manutenzione, invece non è così, era attenzione fin dall'origine, utilizzando quel materiale Corten, che è un acciaio tra l'altro che costa molto, ma molto di più di quelli tradizionali, perché quel colore è legato all'ambiente. Le attenzioni anche a dove sono stati fatti i viadotti, i ponti, le gallerie, all'asfalto anche fonoassorbente, oltre che ha la particolarità di assorbire anche l'acqua, anche i rumori. La particolarità di certi progetti, come anche Brennerleck, dove c'è un'autostrada digitalizzata, dove vengono date indicazioni sulle velocità da percorrere vicino ai centri urbani, questo per gestire non solo il traffico, ma per gestire anche e diminuire l'inquinamento ambientale. Poi potrei citare tante altre cose. Noi abbiamo 3 società che fanno trasporto merci su rotaia. Uno dice, un'autostrada cosa c'entra con la ferrovia? Cioè, perché noi facciamo concorrenza a noi stessi, quindi prendiamo i mezzi pesanti e cerchiamo di portarli il più possibile su ferrovia. Questo perché permette di ridurre sensibilmente l'inquinamento, perché sappiamo che i treni sono elettrici. Abbiamo 800 dipendenti solo in questo settore della ferrovia rispetto a quelli dell'autostrada. Quindi l'attenzione che noi abbiamo all'ambiente, cambiamenti climatici, parte fin dall'inizio della storia di questa società, e poi lo stiamo esplodendo anche con un progetto futuro dove riteniamo di essere anche gli unici in Europa a realizzare questo. Quindi per noi non è greenwashing di manifestare questa attenzione, ma è una cosa che fa parte della nostra storia, del nostro presente e poi anche del futuro che andremo a realizzare.
Grazie Diego. Francesco, torniamo ai nostri... I switch to English. Let's go back to the proposal emerged from the discussion. So we see that we should replace long-term emission reduction targets that today are very long. It's 2030, 2050, so we're talking about 27 years. Should we replace them with a more realistic year-by-year timetable, and why can we do that?
Yes, I will answer in 1 second, but let me say that I need to underline the emotional bond that I feel with Giacomo, because I just found that you also consider a new Hope one of the greatest movies ever. I also have a Princess Leila who is the inspiration of what we are doing. And I also very much share what you say, the basic 2 ingredients to win not only this battle, but all battles are number 1, intelligence, and number 2, enthusiasm. Probably it's enthusiasm number 1 and intelligence number 2. So really do not lose the flame. we unfortunately are a generation of which is dominated by cynicism, no, and mediocrity.
Why are you looking at
No, well, because you are part with me of the same WhatsApp chat where cynicism is very much dominated.
I don't recognize myself in those two aspects. And you either.
And I see the flame in your eyes, the eye of the tiger. Talking about movies, and by the way, Diego, let me remind that immediately after, in the afternoon, we have an entire part of the Dolomite conference, the final part in Bolzano, where we will have the Dolomite as a case of stunning beauty, physical fragility, and resilience, and not only with the Autostrada del Brennero, but with the agri-food, the tourism, no, and water. So let me go back to your question. Yes, in any serious business, in fact, you don't have targets at 2030 or at 2050. If you have a target at 2030, it's almost like you have no target.
Well, the Chinese do, actually.
Sorry?
The Chinese do. They have very long-term horizon.
Well, but if you... No, now you're touching a very delicate and important
But you were talking about
point.
business, sorry.
I mean, if you look to the 5-year plans, they have, in fact, very detailed timetable on how to reach the 55% of reduction of emission in 2030, and this is hugely important for instance, for cities. We have an entire policy inspired by Marianna Mazzucato. It was a mission of making European cities neutral by 2050. And we, for instance, have 100 cities in Europe which that promise, in fact, to be neutral by 2030. And we have been so serious that Rome is one of these 100 cities to be neutral by 2030, which to me is just publicity. That's ridiculous. I mean, if you wanna be, sorry about the reference to Rome, but it's like, it's evident that it's unsustainable. So we need to go beyond rhetoric. This is another thing that we do not want to use politics to make publicity, which is even counterproductive, because people do not trust you, do not believe you. So again, going back to your it's very evident that even the European Commission, the European Union, should specify targets year by year so that we, citizens, can control the key performance indicator and can push, so that policies can use citizen, young energy to create the political space for those promises to happen.
So control and measurement.
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask, Francesco touched on that, but I'd like to ask Barbara Kolm about cities, because I know she's been involved in smart cities, and cities really play a crucial role in climate change. So how can we make cities neutral?
Thank you for this question. We could talk forever, actually, on that topic. And the UN and the 18 organizations that are part of the United for Smart Sustainable Cities movement have done so for the past 6-7 years. And we have come to a conclusion, or at least to a I would say work in progress. We have developed key performance indicators that focus on the economy, on society and culture, and on environment. For all those three coordinators of points, we have made key performance indicators and mixed them together, and can show in a very transparent way the state, the status quo, where the city, where the region is or the village is at the right way, at the right moment. We are very careful in not comparing apples and oranges. So we are looking into the economic integration, because this can be done for a city in Asia or a small village, say, in Asia or in Latin America, or a big city like Dubai or Singapore or any European village in the Alpine region. So economic integration is key. First thing. Second, the region is key, and third of all, size is key. So those three things matter when we model the entire thing. It's actually a simple process that can be done from a city perspective within 2 weeks by loading up all the data. On the one hand, on the other hand, once the outcome, the results are presented, the citizen knows exactly where we stand or where the city, the region stands. And I'm a big fan of direct democracy and liquid democracy especially, and the subsidiarity principle. And I believe that solutions that can be done locally, and we've discussed that, and I'm thankful to the students that they pointed out about that. It's very important that solutions that can be found on the local level, whether it's technological advancements or whether it's collaboration from the citizens to solve a problem, an issue, will help much better. And this is the bottom-up process that we need. I mean, we were all trained that the elites will change the society top-down. I don't think this is the case anymore. We need both approaches, and this is what we have done on the UN level. And again, I think the individualization is truly important as well, that the citizen understands if they, for example, and it was brought up before, if they are very careful with their waste, and if they reduce whatever emissions, then they will help the entire process, and this will be done. And then I think we should also talk a little bit about the incentives that can be provided, both from the political environment, but also from the entrepreneurial environment. And I would just simply add one more sentence, since Giovanna mentioned this, and I think that tax brackets and incentives are truly important to foster this investment on the one hand, and on the other hand, make more direct investments possible, and equity. After all, this is truly important.
Thank you, Barbara. So we see from this list that we have to embrace a lot of changes, but how do we make the population accept the necessary changes required by climate change? Cliff.
Thank you. A very big question. We talk quite a lot in this field of work about just transitions. Just transitions made up of three things: of the economic side, the social sides, and the environment side, the social side, and the community voice. Why the community voice? Because if people do not sort of hook in to the changes that are happening, they rebel. We have seen that climate change is already harming people in many countries now. I think probably the thing that stood out for me last year was that flood in Pakistan. 1/3 of the entire landmass of Pakistan underwater. You imagine that with Italy. You would take the whole of northern Italy underwater. What would that be like for people? It's terrifying. So, the climate is already harming people, but people are rebelling against climate change, and we've seen that in all kinds of jurisdictions. Why? Because they don't have a sense of social justice. They don't have a sense that they've been bought into the changes. So what we need is to come back to that and find the opportunities that work for both. And that's where that just transition comes to. We've also talked about a variety of other initiatives, just energy transitions. These were meant to help countries in low-income countries to help them come out of coal and into clean. I think we're 2.5 years in and not 1 cent has arrived in any single country. So that's not working. What else can we look at on this? We look at loss and damage. Can I give you an example of what loss and damage is actually going to do? Just imagine that in an island in the Caribbean, you have a car. And me from the UK, I stole your car. I then crashed it. And then I sent it back to the island with a very high-priced loan to fix it. Now, when you think, instead of the car, think of the climate and the social factors in that island. That's exactly what it is. And we need something that is much, much better. Are we self-serving, are we selfish as a human race? I'm afraid that is the truth. And we have to get real about how countries and people are responding to necessary changes for climate. And I think we can do it, but we can only do it if we really understand how people feel. You have to get tough about the reality before you can build the opportunities for the future, and there are a lot of opportunities. I think the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US has already been mentioned, but the skill to which that has been designed to help people feel better, families feel better, communities feel better, jobs to be better, supported intermediaries, the people that you trust to get your messages. That was being talked about earlier on. We can double down on new technologies. Electric cars are actually better than petrol cars. That's a fact. They're really good. Insulated homes are better than uninsulated homes. That's a good thing. And it also means that you're not burning as much carbon. Working from home can be really quite nice, and then you're not burning as much carbon. And more ideas. And we have so many technologies, so many new tools, so mmany new ways of doing this. But we have to get out of this diplomatic, bubble. That's a much more, I was going a bit more rude. But we'll stick to the bubble. This diplomatic piece, which actually is not, it's pretending to be good for people in low incomes and so on, but it's not actually doing it. From the GSG, we're a global organization, and what we're seeing country by country is people in low-income areas saying, essentially, we just don't trust the global north anymore. We have to do things ourselves. Great. Let's help those people to develop their own finance system, their own pools of capital, their own opportunities, and that's, I think, where we are. So I'm trying to do a little sandwich here. You have to get the tough reality in order to understand where the fabulous opportunities are. I think the just transition is a great starting point. Some of these other initiatives that have come along, well, I think we need another approach.
So this will bring new hope, as our conference says.
Yeah, you see, I'm not getting any claps here because I'm giving the tough stuff, but we need that tough stuff before we can understand the future.
It's because Cliff touched one of the point, the transforming loss and damage logic. I'd like to ask Francesco. So one of the suggestions is to replace this mechanism of compensation with a global mechanism of solidarity. So why is it important? Why should we do that, if you agree with this suggestion?
Yeah, first of all, let's precise that it's not about replacing, because the loss and damage fund is still not here. Is a proposal. But yeah, the reason are not technical, I guess political. We need to perceive the climate change battle in a different way. And it would be very, very interesting to have a debate about that with our friends from India, from Africa, Brazil. We have the feeling that this idea that we want to divide the world into rich people and poor people, with the rich people helping the poor people, is politically not right. Also because we are among other things, I think the solution, as this conference has very much demonstrated, can come in fact from Africa. You know, in Kenya, there are some startups that are doing very interesting stuff. We saw it into the plenary session on energy. And for one simple reason, no, they do not have the legacy, they do not have the big problem to dismantle what we already have here, no, in some instances. So it's not about dividing the world into two parts, but it's about the world to be as one, as you know. To make another citation, somebody said in one of the most beautiful songs ever. This is Imagine, by the way. So it is really about, our idea of technically of the loss and damage fund would be to have it as a little bit like a Next Generation EU in Europe. All countries are actually contributing to that thing in a very complicated way, but basically on the basis of their GDP. And all countries were supported on the basis of the damage that they, in that case, COVID-19 did differently to different countries. And this would be an instrument where, in fact, the world will end up to be as one.
So a next world generation.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to the urgent need of changing global governance in order to make all this change. Anyway, I'd like to ask, because we are talking about changing in order to fight climate change. So we have to leave all technology behind. I would like to ask an insurance like AXA, how do we actually leave behind whole technology and which requires huge investments, and what does AXA do to promote these new green investments?
But Juliana, it's undoubtful that the level of investment needed and the cost of transition is massive. And but I think everyone, in the beginning of the panel, everyone has been said and called to be contributing in a significant way. In this sense, I think each single company can do their own part. We heard what Diego was mentioning before, and I think is a clear example of sustainability by a company. What we're doing as an AXA, well, first of all, we have been embracing sustainability as a central pillar of our strategy, and we did a few years ago. And now for the next cycle, we are really stepping up in the next level. When we talk about what is our contribution, we always think in a clear framework, which is a three level. Investors, what we can do as an investor. Second, what we can do as an insurance company. And third, what we can do as an exemplary company. And I think we always look at stakeholders as clients, our people, as well as society. So as an investor, what we have been doing till today, investing 26 billion on ESG funds. And we are on track to deliver this number by the end of 2023, but we are setting also the bar very high because we want to reduce the overall carbon footprints of our investment portfolio by 2030. I think as an insurance company, is really going back to what is innovating the offer to reduce the insurance gap. And in order to do that, of course, there is a lot of innovation in product definition, but also using new technology like including ESG KPIs in underwriting the risk, and also helping out the prevention and the transition of our clients. But to be more specific and ambitious, we have been setting also here the need for reducing the carbon footprints for our overall fleet of insured car across the globe by 20%, as well as the same with our corporate clients. So there is a clear commitment to influence and help our client to reduce their carbon footprints. And the third element is really on exemplary company. And we work on two levels. The first one is really reducing emission. We have been funding the investment of a big renewable energy in Spain, which is going to provide all the energy for consumption for all the different AXA buildings in Europe, but also really increasing the significant awareness of the people. So we're doing training for our 100,000 plus employees. They are certified on climate, but also participating to events. They are really setting awareness and consideration by different counterparts and constituents, being student, expert, politicians, and other business partners, which really drive the difference. I think our global leader and CEO, Thomas Buberl, has been always one of the key voices in the industry at the global level. And he recently joined also the Private Sector Investment Lab, which is with other companies and the World Bank, supporting and promoting investment to help emerging market, driving transition. So concrete fact, as the ecosystem of constituents need to really do the part.
Thank you, Giacomo.
Thank
you. Diego, before you talked about the special steel guardrail that looks brown to actually be more environmental friendly. So I'd like to ask you, what are the upcoming investment in the green economy that you're planning for your autostrada?
Allora, il futuro transita attraverso una visione che poi deve essere coniugata con azioni per realizzarla. La nostra visione per il futuro nella mobilità che ci riguarda è quella di creare un green corridor. Noi vogliamo creare il primo green corridor d'Europa. Che cosa significa? Significa un'autostrada a zero emissioni, significa un'autostrada a zero incidenti. È un obiettivo ambizioso, ma l'abbiamo coniugato con azioni in un progetto, in un piano che abbiamo presentato al concedente, in questo caso il Ministero delle Infrastrutture, un piano di investimenti di oltre 7 billion per le prossime decine d'anni. Come si fa ad avere un corridoio a zero emissioni? Le azioni principali, qui le sintetizzo per questioni anche di tempo. Allora, innanzitutto è di avere un'autostrada dove ci saranno solo veicoli a emissioni zero che la percorrono. Quindi noi abbiamo investiremo ancora tantissimo nelle ricariche dei veicoli elettrici, quelli che noi definiamo leggeri, che sono le autovetture. Il futuro disegnato dall'industria automobilistica ci dice che queste vetture saranno elettriche con batterie, come quelle che troviamo sul mercato adesso. Quindi noi stiamo investendo per avere punti di ricarica di ultimissima generazione ovunque. Per lungo tempo poi queste ricariche, per favorire questa mobilità, le abbiamo gestite come ricariche totalmente gratuite per i nostri clienti utenti che percorrono questi percorsi. Secondo investimento rilevante, quello dei punti vendita dell'idrogeno verde, perché l'idrogeno verde sarà la ricarica che avranno bisogno gli autoveicoli pesanti, che saranno elettrici anche questi, ce ne sono già sul mercato e il mercato poi crescerà tantissimo in questi prossimi anni. Veicoli elettrici però che non avranno le batterie, che richiederebbero spazi e pesi che non sono compatibili con i mezzi pesanti, ma funzioneranno a idrogeno. L'idrogeno poi, attraverso un processo, ritornerà verrà trasformato nuovamente in corrente elettrica e emetterà un po' di vapore acqueo. Su questo tema Autobrennero ha realizzato il primo stabilimento in Italia che produce idrogeno verde. Questo c'è fin dal 2014, quindi in epoca dove penso che la maggior parte di noi non conosceva l'idrogeno verde per autotrazione, quindi viene prodotto, quindi abbiamo diciamo un track record non banale dove c'è produzione, c'è stoccaggio, c'è punto vendita. Questi punti vendita verranno riprodotti e anche punti di produzione in N zone dell'autostrada. Questo per fare in modo che tutta la mobilità del traffico pesante, che rappresenta il 50% del nostro fatturato, sia totalmente a emissioni zero. Terzo, lo spostamento, l'assorbimento di quello che è il traffico pesante il più possibile sulla ferrovia, quel tema che ho già citato prima, quindi investiremo ancora in ferrovia, intermodalità. Tutto questo, questa visione coniugata in questi progetti, transita anche attraverso una conoscenza di ciò che sta succedendo a livello globale e che ha impatti anche su un'autostrada di collegamento fra il mondo mediterraneo e la Mitteleuropa, perché ci sono investimenti o ci sono temi della geopolitica che impattano direttamente anche su una città qui piccola come Trento. Ne cito due per semplicità. Il primo è ad esempio il raddoppio del canale di Suez. Uno dice: ma cosa c'entra il canale di Suez con un'autostrada e poi di periferia che collega col mondo della Mitteleuropa? C'entra molto, perché gran parte delle merci che andavano o vengono dall'estremo oriente, dalla Cina, fino a poco tempo fa, fino prima del raddoppio, c'erano navi imponenti che non potevano transitare dal canale di Suez per questioni non solo di dimensioni, ma anche per questioni proprio di spazio, di quantità di transito di navi al canale di Suez, che facevano il periplo dell'Africa e poi andavano nei tre porti principali d'Europa, quindi Amsterdam, Amburgo e Rotterdam. Scaricavano le merci lì che poi scendevano in tutta Europa dalla Mitteleuropa. Ora cosa succede? Succede che una parte considerevole di queste navi oggi arriva nel Mediterraneo poi abbiamo l'Italia, che è stata definita fin da vari tempi questa portaerei, quindi abbiamo questa orografia nostra che permette di avere vari porti, quindi ci sono delle navi che hanno iniziato a scaricare quantità notevoli nei porti italiani, da Genova a Livorno, arrivano poi a Trieste, soprattutto Venezia, e poi sta crescendo molto Ravenna. Queste merci che arrivano qui in Italia, che poi andranno nella Mitteleuropa, e il canale di comunicazione tra il mondo mediterraneo e la Mitteleuropa, quello principale, è questo asse del Brennero, perché qui transita la maggior parte dell'import-export italiano, e tutti gli altri collegamenti che ci sono con la Mitteleuropa, anche messi insieme, sono molto distanti dalle quantità che transitano qui, quindi abbiamo una funzione geopolitica. Non solo questa, e vado a chiudere, poi c'è anche la geopolitica che avevo citato, ad esempio quello che è successo in Ucraina, che conosciamo tutto. L'Ucraina aveva 18 porti dove transitava una quantità di merci notevole in uscita dai prodotti alimentari e l'industria pesante. Questi porti oggi non funzionano, motivi conosciamo, solamente un po' Odessa. Adesso è stato fatto un accordo politico, su questo bisogna dar atto anche dell'attività che ha fatto il nostro esecutivo nazionale, dove c'è un accordo che verrà creato un cosiddetto porto secco, un dry port ad Horonda, questa cittadina che è tra la Slovacchia e l'Ungheria, dove tutta questa merce che prima andava a finire nei porti, che adesso conosciamo che non può transitare, verrà stoccata in questo porto secco e transiterà poi attraverso la ferrovia o le strade, verrà sdoganata dove c'è la zona del quadrante Europa a Verona, e poi andrà nei porti italiani, Trieste soprattutto, poi in parte Venezia e Ravenna. Dove transiterà questa quantità notevolissima di merci? Transiterà attraverso una parte rilevante, l'asse del Brennero. Quindi la visione coniugata con un progetto, nella visione del Green Corridor sono conglobate anche questi fattori di grandi opere mondiali piuttosto che di geopolitica che impattano su questo. Poi chiudo, avevo accennato Green Corridor, zero emissioni che l'ho citato, e zero incidenti attraverso tecnologia. Tecnologia vuol dire digitalizzazione, digitalizzazione vuol dire guida autonoma, perché oggi il 95% degli incidenti deriva dal fattore umano. Il fattore umano non è più comprimibile se uno è disattento, è stanco, usa il telefonino, quant'altro, degli incidenti anche mortali, e l'elemento che li può ridurre a zero è la tecnologia, quindi con la guida autonoma, e la nostra autostrada, non solo la nostra, tante anche altre italiane, hanno realizzato tecnologia che non ha nessuno a livello globale, dove c'è la guida autonoma. Qui cito un progetto che da noi è già funzionante da anni, che attraverso C-Roads, dove c'è il track platooning, questi mezzi pesanti che circolano senza autisti, perché c'è l'infrastruttura, l'autostrada attraverso sensori, spire, 5G e un software sofisticato che indica ai mezzi come andare, dove andare, e quindi toglie la tecnologia completamente l'errore umano.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Yeah. I would say the politics is behind, because now we need a new rule to allow this self-driving cars of trucks. Anyway, I want to go back to our 8th proposal. Giovanna, the problem-solving group told us that we need more global representation. So how do we construct global representation? What is the role of education, and how do you capture more youth participation? Young people are actually the main actor today. We still have. They started again this Fridays for Future movement. How do you capture this energy, the youth energy?
I'll come to this question in 1 second, but let me say something, having heard the panelists until now. I mean, this incredible description of roads and trucks without pilots brought me somehow sort of an inspirational figure, because if we need less pilots on our trucks, and this comes to education and democracy, we definitely need stronger pilots in our political arena. So let's drive less with pilots, but we definitely need, and 3 ideas. First of all, we've been talking all these days about how we can transform rules, regulation of capital assessment. Very important things have been said. And again, I would like to just comment the fact that the market for ESG and especially impact finance is growing, and it's growing because pension funds, institutional investors, very important what Giacomo said before, you know, they are already there. So my question is, who are the pilots that are missing? And I think that, for example, and when we talk about the impact paradigm in the economic sphere, we're not only talking, we had a very good session yesterday about this, we're not only talking about private capital, we're also talking about public expenditure. And public expenditure is needed to produce outcomes, concrete outcomes, experienceable outcomes. And this is what nourishes democracy. Because if democracy doesn't deliver, so there was 2 questions in your question. One was about democracy and the other one was about education. So if democracy doesn't deliver outcomes, if all of us, if we don't feel that public expenditure in different sectors are reaching us, you know, that is a major failure. That means that we don't have pilots in the programs. And I want to make a case, which is an Italian case. In fact, no, it's a European case, which is the PNRR. The PNRR, which is our, not really so, because it's a different structure, it's debt, but as Cliff said before, very wisely, I mean, IRA has been the sort of the change maker of the system for transition to green technologies. So which is the change maker on the carrot part, not the sticks, but the carrot part in Europe, it's the PNRR. So it's this massive investments. Are we doing this looking at outcomes? In a way, it is a big exercise to be outcome oriented in different terms as it was before in European mechanism, financial mechanisms. I don't need to go into that. But this is really a role for education. There is no business school in the world now that doesn't have a department for, sustainability and economic sustainability. For me, I am a Keynesian. I was born in a Keynesian school. I had a great professor. I always say this because I honor him, called Federico Caffè, and he taught us, that we could also dig holes and replace them, and that would create revenues and economy. I'm a partially Keynesian economist today. It's not enough to dig holes anymore. We want to have digging holes, public finance producing impact. And holes don't produce impact.
Smart hole.
Smart talk. So the education. The education means in all universities, schools, have this new approach to a blended finance, public and private, but that has a central paradigm, which is producing outcomes. If we don't want to call it impact, which can confuse, let's call it outcomes. And outcomes that are measurable and additional and, that intentional, thank you, and that reach the population. Because I think that one of the things that is really depressing, I was telling before, I'm in this ecosystem since many years. I was leading the Italian delegation to the Rio Summit in '92. So this just tells you how old I am. But I'm still not frustrated enough. I haven't lost hope. I've seen a lot of changes. And I think it's very good now that, mainstream finance is challenged on the change, but even mainstream public spending must be challenged, because otherwise democracies don't work, and that brings us lots of problems and populistic reactions, which are not going to solve anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Barbara. I have actually two questions for you. One is about consumer. How do we actually incentivize consumer to make them behave more greenly, to actually have a more wise behavior? And also I have a question about youth. One of the proposals is to lower the legal voting system, and they suggest to bring it down from 18 to 16 years old. I have a 16-year-old son, and despite the fact that he's very well informed, I would never let him vote. What do you think?
Well, thank you. Those are really challenging questions, and I would like to start with the first one. How do we make people understand and create the right carrots and sticks set up for citizens to go towards net zero? Well, net zero is an intangible good. Make it tangible. This is the first thing. And the experiences that we have made on the UN level with the Smart Sustainable Cities, where co-creation activities, partnerships, showing those innovative solutions and facilitating knowledge sharing. So those are the big 4 points that we can combine on the one hand with the citizens, the users of those non-tangible products or tools or ideas on the one hand, the second, the financiers, that was already covered. And then, of course, we need to bring in industry and the markets and the suppliers, and of course, the international organizations do have a role to play. So I think this environment has worked well. We have experimented a lot during the last 3 days on getting the right solutions. And once again, thanks to the students for having prepared all those documents for a very long time under the guidance of many of us. But still, it's your outcome. And then when we look at the question, I don't want to be too long. In Austria, you may vote when you're 16 for elections on the local level. And again, I'm a big fan of subsidiarity principle, and the more direct things are, the more direct solutions are, the easier they are to understand. That's true in politics. That's, I think, true also in economics. Maybe we could say on a local level, yes, but on a national level, I really doubt it. And I would like to do this or giving a reason to that by quoting something that has already been mentioned today and yesterday and the other day. Laudate Deum was discussed a lot. And I would like to remind you of the Quadragesimo Anno by Pius XI, and where he was talking about responsibility. And it's not only about self-responsibility, but it's also about our social responsibility to address. And I think we need to take a step back, be a little bit more humble, and rethink the Quadragesimo Anno again on this responsibility question. And I think this answers why one should vote on a national or supranational level and not on a local level, or the other way around, on the local level and not on the supranational level.
Thank you, Barbara. We're approaching at the end of our panel, but I have a quick question for Giacomo, and then I have a very, very quick question for everybody else. So Giacomo, because we are talking about climate change, and we are in Italy, and we saw recently a massive flood in Romagna, but we discovered that not many households had insurance. So it appears that insurance against climate catastrophes might be very helpful, but that's not the case in Italy. How do we change the culture, and how could be a solution to even incentivize this that could be applied in Italy, but also to other countries?
Well, I think it is a disgrace what has been happening in Italy, and it's probably the first time we see what we call a tropicalization of the Italian country. I think, first of all, there is two elements where we need to act, and we can also do from insurance standpoint. The first one is really innovation on the offer on protection gap. It had been mentioned 5% of the household were insured against NatCat, natural events. There is just 15% of the cars which are insured against CatNat, and also the small companies, they don't have any coverage. And that is really bringing back the capacity to be resilient as an economy. If I compare what has been happening in Europe, in Italy, we are probably the only country not having a public-private combination to support what is happening. And there is also law obligation to insure our assets. So I think one of the key elements to do is keep increasing the awareness. The first one is really innovation of the offer, and covering the insurance gap also for the vulnerable segment of the population. And we have been talking about many of them, and we're doing a lot of effort. AXA has been moving into inclusive protection, as I mentioned before. The second one is keep increasing the overall narrative and the awareness. Training, college, secondary school, we have been training almost 1,000 students. We need to keep increasing this awareness, because that will bring the next level of this is what is happening, these are the solutions, and it will have many of the constituents really participating into that. But I think I like what has been said before. The narrative should shift a little bit. And I think the narrative should include a little bit the youth and what is happening as we're doing today. But in the same time, the narrative should focus on what is the future of humanity, what we can bring, what are the solutions. Polite and Alexandra were mentioning really that if we show that there is money in making the green economy sustainable, if we show that there are solutions to the problems and we shift the narrative from just a big problem into huge and constructive solution, that will help us out really increasing the culture.
Thank you. So maybe in a few years we won't call it anymore green investment or green economy. It will be just investment and economy. Because we want investment.
That will be probably the solution. Now we need to label them as a green economy because we need promotion, advertising. We need to make it more visible everything. And the same story is about inclusive and inclusivity. I mean, we don't need to talk about inclusivity in the future if everyone is going to be feel as accepted in the individuality as well as in the diversity.
So thank you very much. I know it's very late, it's 10 after 1 and we were supposed to finish by 1. So your answer is what separates you from lunch. So I ask you just very, very few words. We have 8 proposals, but what is, according to each of you, the most urgent and important thing to do? Very few seconds. Just start from Giovanna to Cliff. Just one thing. Right away, the most important, the most urgent.
If I have to choose,
yes,
I'm obsessed. Financing, finance, 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 the energy transition, and COP28 in few days, I think should be really addressing the issue of how do we mobilize that pool of capital to do this.
Diego.
Concordo anch'io su questo punto della transizione energetica, però con l'attenzione di avere la visione globale, che quindi non solo microprogetti che poi possono non portare elementi concreti, quindi visione globale per l'incidenza e soprattutto poi anche una sostenibilità economica di questi progetti a livello globale.
Francesco.
The most urgent is the loss and damage, because this is what the COP28 has to deal with. The most important to me is the democracy, so global citizen assemblies. And just one thing, if we decide that we do not want to lower to 16 the age for voting, we have a complementary proposal of having all the Princess Leila to have a votes through their parents, to give to their parents,
I agree
like
on
you,
that. I agree
an additional vote because you have some Han Solo to take care of.
Yes. Giacomo.
I like the idea of a simplified COP agenda in a few vitals. And second, I would support big time the idea of more financing and investment in technology and transition technology big time.
Thank you. Barbara.
Thank you. City-based innovation, experimentation, green market revolution kind of things, bottom up, and then changing the finance on that front as well.
Cliff.
I'm going for number 9 because it isn't there, which is new technology, for positive impact to benefit the people. The future will come from the ideas that come out of the people in the 4th row there, and they definitely should have the vote.
Thank you so much. So let me thank you, our panelists. Terrific panel. Thank you so much, and we almost respected the time.
Yeah, we have a picture to be made with all the students, plus we have some very quick prize to give to some of the people here, some key people. So if we can really very quickly have all the students here for the picture, and also all the chairs. So we need Roddington and Alexandra, plus Jan Piotrowski for some very quick.
Yeah, everyone else is invited to enjoy lunch outside, and you really deserved it. Fantastic conference, fantastic participation. Thank you for your attention and contributions. Enjoy lunch. It's outside in the entrance area. Have a safe transfer to Bolzano or have a safe trip home.